unruly crowds on Saturday when people get to know this is now.
Yeah, okay. You're not putting anything on the tender, are you, Roland?
Yes, I put in the L.N.E.R coat of arms.
What, in the middle?
Yes, yes.
But,
Now, some people have said to me, well, why are you doing the water carrier? I said, look, if Gresley had faced the same problem as what we're facing with water,
yeah.
I said, I'm quite happy that he might well have done that.
well, yeah.
Yes.
Yes, I wasn't sure whether it was chromium or whether it was...
no, it's stainless
specified
steel.
stainless steel,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
And this reading is stainless steel.
Yes, it is, yeah.
But the nameplate was... If you get hold of it.
Yes. I need to get
Yeah. Well, my name's Peter Townend, and I started work on the railway in 1941 during the war. I was a premium apprentice at Doncaster, and my certificate of apprenticeship was signed by Peppercorn.
And he was one of the famous engineers on the
L.N.E.R. He signed my indentures at the end of the 5-year period. But during that 5-year period, I went to the technical college at Doncaster, got my ordinary national on a 1-day-a-week basis, and I was sent on a 6-month intensive course to Wigan Mining and Technical College in Lancashire to get the higher national in 6 months. This was a wartime measure and done by the government, and they paid you a subsistence allowance. Nothing to do with the railway really, but they were anxious to get people trained quickly. And so by the time I was 21, I was qualified with the higher national and everything, and then took the endorsements for the mechanical engineers. Now, I was born at Doncaster, and I was familiar with these locomotives from the day they were built. I saw all the Pacifics as they came in and out of the works, and we saw the A4s, of course, in all the different liveries and silver link. I was taken by my father to take a photograph of Quicksilver when it was painted silver inside the works gate. He had to ask the watchman if he could go in and take a photograph.
Did your dad have a railway connection as well?
He was interested to some degree. He was a school teacher, and I always remember he tried to photograph the Silver Jubilee. And we used to go down to Ella's Crossing, just south of Doncaster, where the footpath crossed the main lines. And we used to go down in an evening to see the Jubilee go past at 7:30. And the railway came to a complete stop in those days for the Jubilee to run past. 70 miles an hour would be its normal speed. But he took his photograph, and all he got was a row of wagons at the side, because of course the viewfinder in those days on cameras was not as today. But he had considerable difficulty getting the engine on the photograph because of the movement.
So can you remember as a little boy what the first time was that you saw one of these Gresley A4 Pacifics?
Quite honestly, I can't. But I always remember the first memory I've got of seeing a railway engine. I was very small, but I was taken down to Marshgate, where the 2-track main line, as it was then, crossed over the canal and the river. And I was taken down to see the Royal train pass. And I've no recollection of what was on the Royal train, but I remember an L.N.E.R tank engine, LMS it was in those days, came in on a local train from Askern. And I remember asking my dad as to what was an LMS engine doing at Doncaster, and that stuck in my memory, and not the Royal train, which I can't tell you what was on it at all. But I gather, you know, I was the next memory, the first memory of the Pacific that I can remember vividly is the inaugural run of the Silver Jubilee.
Now tell us about the Silver Jubilee. What was the point of that train? Why was it called the Silver Jubilee?
Well, it was started running in the autumn of 1935 and was named the Silver Jubilee because of the Silver Jubilee of the reigning King and Queen. My recollection of it, It had been built, it had only been running a fortnight, and I was taken down by my father to the station at Doncaster, and every vantage point, you couldn't move on the platform for people standing so many deep. And then, just as it was getting dark, everything came to a stand. Nothing moved whatever on the railway, which I'd never seen before, because there was some movement, shunting or whatever. But everything came to a stand for several minutes, and then there was a long wail on a chime whistle, and out of the gloom came Silver Link hauling the Silver Jubilee on its first northbound run. And it came through the station at about 70 miles an hour, an unheard of speed, because nothing came through Doncaster without stopping. And this came tearing through with this long wail and passed into the night. And I always remember that. I've never forgotten it. But,
and who were all those people? Were they railway people or just
a lot of them
or
would be, but I think the total population of Doncaster was manning all the bridges and advantage points. So in those days, you've got to remember that these things created a lot of headlines. In fact, in the national papers, the whole of the front page, or half of it, would be a photograph of the Silver Jubilee. Now, that was the fastest thing running at that time. Aircraft and things were only just getting off the, into the era of high speed. But high speed on the railway was something that hit the headline and created enormous publicity for the L.N.E.R. And it caused people to go down and take a tremendous interest in what was happening on the railway, and each new loco out of Doncaster would immediately be illustrated in the national press, but not in just small photographs, but photographs that were, this big on the half a front page and that type of thing.
So it wasn't just the train spotters, the enthusiasts,
no.
It was everybody who was interested?
Yes, everybody. My father wasn't a railway enthusiast in any shape or form, but he would, get carried away with everybody else. Oh, tonight we're going to see the Silver Jubilee go past on its first run, and that was a tremendous following.
What did the Silver Jubilee look like to you as a boy? Just describe it to us.
Well, it was obviously nicknamed the Silver Streak, and it was in that extent that it passed through quickly, and you got this impression of something silver passing, because the whole train matched. Originally, later they painted it blue, but originally the train was silver, the loco was silver, the whole thing blended in as a creation that fitted in naturally. It wasn't something that was stark and vivid. It was blended in, and on a gloomy night, this going through at 70 miles an hour was, created an impression.
Who was the train for? What kind of people travelled?
It was for business people who would come up from Newcastle in the morning. The inaugural run was from Newcastle in the morning, but everybody was at work or at school in those, during the day, so they couldn't see it pass by at 12 o'clock, but they could see it coming back in an evening. And the business people could have an afternoon working in London and then go back at 5:30 when the Silver Jubilee left and be back in Newcastle in 4 hours. Now, the important thing about that was they could go up to London and back in a day and do several hours work in London, which was important from a business point of view, and go back to Newcastle, and they had dining cars and everything. A meal was 5 shillings on the Silver Jubilee, and I think for perhaps third class, second class passengers, it was ½ a crown. But you could get a meal on the train and everything in comfort. I'm not sure how the riding was, because of the state of the railway in those days. There was no long welded track or anything, and you got joints every few feet, and you got points and crossings at every station. The whole railway was not built for high-speed running, but you have to start somewhere. So the train was put on and created a sensation.
On the 110th anniversary of the opening of the first English railway, when George Stephenson's locomotive number 1 covered 26 miles at an average speed of 8 miles an hour, the Silver Jubilee, drawn by the streamlined silver link, left King's Cross. She is to run regularly between London and Newcastle, and on her trial trip, she attained a record speed of 112 miles an hour. Speed, comfort, and a wild modern beauty.
I was the driver and Jack Luty was the fireman. I'm quite sure in my own mind that the Silver Link was the finest engine I ever rode upon. She was fitted with a speedometer in the driver's cabin, but something went wrong with it, and I didn't know accurately what speed we were doing. They had a speed recording machine in one of the coaches behind. I judged it to be about 90 miles an hour. Just beyond Biggleswade, Mr. Gresley, the chief mechanical engineer who had designed the engine, and I shall always say was the finest locomotive engineer we ever had, Mr. Gresley comes through the corridor and shouts in my ear, "Ease your arm, young man. Do you know you touched 112 twice? Go a bit easier. We've got an old gentleman of a director in the back and he's getting a bit touchy."
Tell me about Nigel Gresley and what his job was and how he came to build these type of engines with the sloping front.
The A4 was a culmination of his designs of the Pacific locomotives, which started in 1922 with the building of Great Northern, which in itself was a complete breakaway from anything that had gone before. Most locomotives are usually an enlargement or a detailed alteration to a previous design. But when Great Northern was built in 1922, Gresley put the biggest boiler with a large grate that hadn't been seen apart from the Great Bear in this country, and that was not a loco to be built for future.
So it was bigger. It was bigger and better than anything.
Bigger than better. It had a tremendous heating surface, a 6-foot diameter boiler, 6'5.5" at the top of the taper. It had 3 cylinders, a multi-cylinder loco, and it was absolute future as far as material was concerned, because he was very far-sighted in trying to use lighter materials. When you're running at speed, all those rods and things going round, if you can reduce the weight of them, and he was well to the forefront of reducing the weight of coupling rods, connecting rods, they were just over half the weight of what they would have been with normal steels. So everything was nickel chrome steel, and didn't work out in the end. It had to be replaced eventually, but they ran a considerable mileage before we got into things like fatigue failure and things like that.
So how did he get from that engine in 1921 to
well, they
to this
gradually,
one in 35?
In 1922 was the first one. Immediately he was appointed the CME, the grouping, and he wasn't the senior applicant, but he was appointed chief mechanical engineer, and an order was put in for 50 Pacific, and it was obvious that Pacifics were going to run the L.N.E.R on all the different routes. He couldn't run them on the Great Eastern, but the Great Central, the Great Northern, the North Eastern, the North British, all got Pacific locomotives, and that became the standard. Now, on one route, the Edinburgh to Carlisle, it was a very hilly route, and you had to work the loco pretty hard over there. And they did test, and they decided they would go for a higher pressure loco. Now, Gresley wasn't very keen on higher pressure locos, because that increased maintenance cost of boilers. And so anyway, they tried an A3, an A1 with the 220-pound boiler instead of 180, and it was a success. Worked the Waverley route, and several engines were stationed at Carlisle for the rest of the L.N.E.R's existence. But I rode on a loco from Edinburgh to Carlisle, and it was a hard route to flog a Pacific on with the gradients and things. But that was successful. They mucked about with cylinder sizes and eventually standardised on 19-inch cylinders, 220-pound boilers, and then built some new locos, new Pacifics, with those details. Now, when they came to wanting a loco for the Silver Jubilee, they'd asked the German people if they would build a high-speed rail car, which had been successful in Germany. And Gresley had been to Germany on the institution visits and things. He was familiar with what was going on. And they couldn't produce anything but a two-car set, which would not have given the dining facilities and comfort that Gresley was able to produce on the Silver Jubilee as a six-car train. And eventually it had another carriage put on there.
So the influences on it were the engineering and the design that came from Germany.
The detail of the design. The A4 was slightly altered in higher boiler pressure than the A3. It had 250 pounds instead of 220, and that reduced the cylinder size by half an inch to 18.5. And those dimensions, it had a 9-inch valve instead of an 8-inch piston valve. And though just jiggled the dimensions slightly, but really there was very little difference between the A3 and the A4. And the loco was streamlined because that was a fashion. Everybody was thinking of streamlining and whatnot at the time. And of course Gresley gave a lot of thought to the streamlining of the A4. And this is one of the things, a great feature of the locomotive. It's all curves. He did not allow any vertical lines or anything to mar the shape of the loco, which was worked out in the wind tunnel. And various problems arose because the motive power people specified to Gresley that they had to have access to the front. They hadn't to foul the loading gauge, and the firemen had to stand somewhere to clean the smoke box out, this type of thing. The idea of opening the cod's mouth with a key came from the refuse carts on Doncaster Corporation. He walked home one lunchtime, he'd got this problem of designing it and doing the drawing, and he saw the arrangement on the refuse cart, went back and did the arrangement for the A4. Now, when you look at other people's streamlining, and I'm not trying to throw a stone, but the L.N.E.R was extremely successful with the thought that went into the detailed design, which some of the other people didn't cover quite in the same way.
So you've talked about the Silver Jubilee, which was the first high-speed train in the UK. That came out in 1935 for the Silver Jubilee of the King and Queen. How did we come... What happened next, as it were?
Well, the next thing was that the government gave them money under some scheme to build more locomotives to try and renew the assets of the railway, which were getting a bit ancient. And Gresley built more A4s. But in 1937, it was the coronation year of King George VI and Queen Elizabeth. And to celebrate that, the L.N.E.R thought they would put on a train from King's Cross to Edinburgh, which was further than the Jubilee. They couldn't do it in a day. It wasn't done for business reasons. It was done for normal passengers who wanted to travel from London to Edinburgh in the late afternoon and get there before dark, which was a time to go into an hotel and one thing and that. So the train left King's Cross at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the blue A4s were very carefully liveried to match the train, which was blue, and that was the Coronation, which started in 1937 with an observation saloon at the back of the train, which was similar in shape to perhaps the front of the train.
And how many engines were built for that train?
They built 4 for that train. The last of the order had already been built and actually ran in grey livery until they worked out the blue livery for the Coronation. But the red wheels, the garter blue, is all taken from the Coronation of King George VI.
And why were they given the names that they were given?
You've got to remember, before the war, they were very proud of the British Empire, and the main constituents to it were the Union of South Africa, the Dominion of Canada, Empire of India. None of them was the same. They're all different prefixes, but Commonwealth of Australia and the Dominion of New Zealand. Mustn't forget that one. And they all received the names and the detailed finish which had never been fitted to the loco before. Even the LMS put chromium plating on the Silver Jubilee loco, but they satisfy themselves by building one loco, calling it Silver Jubilee. But the L.N.E.R built the 4 locomotives streamlined with the special garter blue livery. And the garter blue livery and the red wheels came from the Coronation colours of King George VI and Queen Elizabeth. And then were perpetuated for the Silver Jubilee and the West Riding. So they had one spare set of coaches, and it was difficult with different liveried trains, so they decided to paint all the trains, streamlined trains, blue, garter blue, and that became the standard livery before the war of all the A4s and the trains that they pulled.
What was the reaction of the public when the trains came out, when the engine and the train came out like it did for the Coronation?
Well, they immediately hit the headlines as the next sort of event on the L.N.E.R. And I used to go down in an evening before the war on the bicycle. Everybody biked in those days. Nobody had cars much, not a very few. And we used to go down to either Ellis Crossing or Rosington Bridge and see the Coronation go by, the Jubilee go by, the West Riding in an evening. You got 3 streamlined trains that you could see go by.
Where it goes.
Just pop them on the scanner and print them off the computer and they come up. That's a shadow under it.
Yes, it is, isn't it? Yeah.
So you've got to be careful of that. Okay, I know you mentioned at the time what size was it. Well, that's the nearest I can tell you.
Well, there you are. If you've got the dimensions on here, it's
Yeah.
1'3" by 1'6". Yeah.
And of course you got the, it looks quite small.
It does, doesn't it?
When
Yeah.
you look at the loco as a whole.
Yeah, yes.
And of course you got the trim all the way along.
Yes, yeah. Quite a lot more room under there than you think.
Yeah. And the third one,
That one is particularly.
doesn't show like that.
But what year did it get that? But it
I can't remember without.
137 livery drawing is it shows the handrails in blue. The cycles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did King George and Queen Elizabeth have anything to do with the engine?
Not to my knowledge. I would think they were aware of it, or probably their office was, obviously. But the High Commissioners of these countries were very interested because each of the countries in turn supplied a whistle from their own railways to fit. And even after the war, when we launched the ship, the Empress of Canada, the High Commissioner requested the Dominion of Canada to work the train. And I was at King's Cross at the time, and Dominion of Canada was a very high mileage waiting to go into works, and I had to turn it out in perfect condition to work this special train for the launch of the ship at the High Commissioner's request. So obviously they took an interest in the locomotive named after their country.
So the celebrity of the engines went right round what was then the Empire.
Yes, oh yes, it was known because New Zealand got the whistle from New Zealand, Canada had a hooter from the Canadian Railways, and I think South Africa had one. I think each of the countries supplied one of their whistles to fit to the loco.
How long did the train and the engine run like this for? What was the period of its celebrity? How did that come to an end?
Well, the years immediately pre-war, from 1935 to 1939, was the epoch of the streamlined train. After that, of course, wartime conditions and the whole thing was stopped immediately. War broke out. The locos ran in normal service and didn't get painted black, for some time. But after the war, the L.N.E.R immediately put the A4s back into garter blue with chromium stainless steel letters. So, but then of course the numbers had changed. So you got a single figure number 1 or number 7 in there.
And what's your happiest memory? Because you ended up, I don't want to to spend too long on it, but you ended up at Top Shed, and you were responsible for a number of these engines.
Yeah.
What happened to the Dominion of New Zealand in its later life, so to speak?
I had New Zealand at King's Cross as one of my locos, number 13, and that was rostered along with all the other A4s that we had. We had 19 A4s when I was at King's Cross, and eventually I got up to 12 A1s and several A3s. So we had a very large allocation of Pacific locomotives, and they worked all the principal trains that I was involved with on the East Coast Main Line.
Isn't that beautiful?
Lovely.
Do you know Bob Timmins, or do you know his work?
I don't actually, but very pleased to meet him.
No, this is Jim Baldwin.
I'm sorry.
Bob Timmins did this.
I can't take credit for this one, I'm afraid, Peter.
Right.
Yes, excellent, isn't
I
it?
think you'd have a job to fault it, Peter.
I wouldn't dream of
Because Bob Timmins is, well, I would say he's the best songwriter in the country on this kind of work.
You can't tell the colours, unfortunately.
No, you can't, can you?
On
No.
photograph, and also detailed photographs in pre-war weren't always very clear. But on the face of it, I would have said that.
Go on, Shall I just sort of go a little bit closer and have a look?
Yeah.
You can take a picture of that one.
You can, Hey boys.
This has been varnished 3 times, I believe, so...
It's on. The other side's on.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. I didn't do that.
No,
Did Dominion of New Zealand hold any records?
No, not to my knowledge. Canada ran 109 miles an hour, didn't break the record, but none of the others in the Coronation series did anything untoward. They ran in normal, so you got to remember that records didn't run a railway. The reliability and mileage was the thing that mattered, and they used to publish in the L.N.E.R magazine before the war that, say, number 4489 or 4492 had done 37 consecutive runs on non-stop to Edinburgh and things like that. These were the feats that were important. The Silver Jubilee ran 130,000 miles before the first failure of the locomotive, and that was a broken oil pipe. The reliability and availability was the key important thing. And doing it, I think the key to the success of the A4 was the fact they're economical. You would not have done these trains if you couldn't have got to Edinburgh on 9 tons of coal.
And what's your reaction now to seeing the way that this engine has been done up to represent Dominion of New Zealand?
I think it's long overdue, and I'm sorry to say that it's taken so long to get a locomotive put back into its proper Coronation livery, and I'm delighted to see it.
And how did you feel this morning when you walked in to see
Marvellous. I've never seen an A4 with all its stainless steel fittings and things since, 1940 odd. So that's now many 60s, 70 years.
It's quite a remarkable feat that people have managed.
I never thought I would see one back in its full, proper Coronation livery. But I'm delighted to see it, and I'm so glad that Roland's done it. All right.
And we left this for you to pull off. Pull all that off, and then you can see it in its glory.
Can I take it all
Yeah,
off?
go on, take it all off that one.
Yeah, well.
And 15 years ago, one of the two beaver tails was a carnforth
Yeah,
that David Smith owned.
yeah.
And he was stood in a shed there with the rear windows, the rear windows had gone,
Yeah.
and the roof slats that sloped down were just sticking out and wafting in the breeze.
Yeah.
And I thought, he's still got the stainless strip on it. And he turned around the bottom.
Yeah.
And I measured it.
And that
Because
was,
one day I thought I shall want to know what width that was.
Measurement
Yeah,
was.
yeah. And it was 2.5 inches.
So that's
Yeah,
exactly right.
Yeah, yeah. This is Peter Townend.
But selling for corks and dipsticks, absolutely important for the running of one of those things. Slow up nicely, don't they?
Just getting that one ready to put on. Once that one's on. Yeah, that's it. We've got there, we've got stopped at Holgate Junction. There's no problem with it.
Right,